what I learned a long time ago was if you're going to do something on the web or anywhere, if you have the chance to be number one, and there's no guarantee, but if you have the chance to be number one, that's an opportunity.
Welcome to another episode of Contrabass Conversations, your show covering life on the low end of the spectrum. I'm your host, Jason Heath, and I'm so glad you're here with us today. Visit our site at contrabassconversations.com for all the details about what we're doing here. And I love to learn people's stories, and I love it if you reach out and told me your story. And you can do that by emailing me at feedback@contrabassconversations.com. And I know you're going to love today's story featuring Corey Brown. Now, Corey's the founder and CEO of No Treble, which is an online magazine dedicated to all things bass. And it's taken the world by storm in the past years and has dozens of regular guests and former contributors. Wonderful place to spend your time. I'm sure you've probably checked out No Treble in the past. If you somehow have not, go there now. It's a great site. And it was so much fun chatting with Corey. And in addition to talking about No Treble, we talked about the history of the site and so forth. We chat about Corey's early years in music, leaving music school for a career in graphic design, and how he got involved in building websites in the early 90s, kind of the Wild West of the web. We also talk about Corey running the official Jaco Pastorius website, how he ended up working for years with Seth Godin, creating Squidoo, and work-life balance, and many other topics. Corey's a super cool guy, has had a fascinating path in the creative arts, and I know you're going to dig this conversation. Here we go. All right, well, we are on the line with Corey Brown, who is the founder of No Treble, and it's such a thrill to have you on the show. Thanks for being here, Corey.
Hey, I really appreciate your time. Thanks for having me.
And let folks know a little bit about your early years in music. What was your first instrument?
My first instrument was double bass. And, I've told this story before, but, in the early 70s, I was lucky to have parents who were really into music. And so we had a lot of vinyl in the house. Mm-hmm. And I think it was probably like 71. I was probably like 3 years old at the time. My dad went out and bought one of those killer 70s stereos with the big speakers that look like furniture. And my father always cranks the bass on all his stereos. I mean, cranks it. Uh-huh. And I remember, listening to all their records, and they had all this great stuff. And I remember like feeling the vibration in the floor, because the bass was so cranked. And I was always fascinated with that. And, I didn't really have an understanding about what instruments were what, but somehow I whether it was television or whatever, got to understand, oh, those are drums and some of the other instruments. And so, but I always kind of gravitated towards that vibration that was obviously coming from the bass. And so years later, I was in the 5th grade, and I think it was the start of the year. And the music teacher came to our class and said, anybody that wants to join strings, follow me. And so, I really wanted to play an instrument at that point. So I jumped up and went down, and, she had me try all 4 instruments. So she started me on the violin, hated it. Viola, hated it. Cello, I thought was pretty cool. But then she handed me an upright bass, and, I plucked the low E string, and it just connected. Yeah. I was like, wow, that's it. And so I was always drawn to that. And I immediately said, this is it. She says, let me see how big your hand is. She said, your hand's big enough. And man, I dragged that thing to and from school on the school bus, every day. I was just really, really into it. Oddly enough, I switched to saxophone in middle school, but went right back to the bass short time after that. And that's been my primary instrument ever since.
That's a great image of you like hauling that bass out of the school bus. Everybody like,
oh my gosh. And it was a long walk to the bus stop, man. It was, my dad always said, we should figure out how to put wheels on the thing, so you can ride it down the street. But, I was that into it.
Well, I love that it's like the stereo and connecting with the bass on the stereo. I was talking to a guy recently, and he was talking about his teacher, Jeff Campbell, who teaches at Eastman, likes to say bass is the only instrument that has a knob dedicated to it on the stereo, right? It's like you got your
right. That's right. That's right. Yeah. And thankfully my dad cranked it because who knows, if he hadn't, if he preferred the trebly side of things, who knows what, I might have picked up a violin or
Right.
something.
Yikes.
Yeah. 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 Right.
Now, when did you get into electric? When did that happen?
That was in high school. I think I was probably 14 years old. I started out like most people with just a horrible, horrible electric bass. The action was ridiculous, and I saved my money. And I think when I was 15, by that point, I was like this huge Jaco nut, and the only bass that I could afford was this old 71 P bass that had a warp neck.
Oh,
so I took it to this guy who repaired instruments, and I said, rip the frets out. Because like everybody, it was his mid 80s, early 80s, whatever. I just wanted to be Jaco. So I had him rip the frets out. And, of course, on a P, I just couldn't never get the tone. And I couldn't have gotten the tone on a jazz either that he got. But that was it. That was my bass for a long time. That was my only bass for a long, long time. And I still have it. It's kind of falling apart now. Sure. But yeah.
I wonder how many guys, because I remember like I didn't do that to my P bass, but I came so close. I wonder how many guys were inspired to go and pull up the frets and epoxy over the fingerboard.
Yeah, I think it had to have been a lot back then, man. I mean, I think a lot of people today, it's harder to recognize his genius because he started a whole movement that has followed. And so you have all these virtuosos on the bass who treat it as a solo instrument and everything today. But back then, it was just, I'm sure you remember, just earth shattering. And so I think, everybody wanted to be like him. I knew a lot of people like that. So I saw a lot of fretless basses around.
Well, and I think it was on a recent Groove episode I was listening to. It's Mitch mentioned, like, is there any other instrument that's that closely associated with like one person? And I was trying to think of that because, like, if you say electric bass, like,
right,
how even someone who doesn't know much at all about electric bass, like Jaco is going to be the name they know. Like if I think about like guitar, is there one person that you come up with? I mean, like Jimi Hendrix or
sure,
but I mean, there's so many people, right? It's just interesting that like that impact that guy had on the music scene, but on the bass world. I mean, it's just
absolutely. I mean, like I said, I think if you're old enough, you remember. I think it was somebody in the CC Riders that said, there was bass before Jaco and there was bass after Jaco. And I think that if you're old enough to remember what that was like, and that's not to discredit anybody that came before him, because certainly there were tons and tons of great players, but he just turned it on its head, just single-handedly, to me at least, transformed the instrument.
For sure. Well, I had the wonderful experience. You probably had this too, but like I've met this young electric bass guy. He's like 16, 17, and we were talking and this and that. It was at a music camp, and I said, well, Jaco, right? Jaco. And he's like, who's Jaco? And pull out the iPhone, show him a video. You just watch that, the eyes bug out.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. I think what's been great to watch, is that with YouTube, and certainly now with the documentary, that people that, the younger crowd who didn't experience it firsthand, like I did as an older guy, I think they're starting to appreciate it more than maybe they had before, because, there's a lot of current people to look up to, now that have taken what he did and evolved it into something even bigger and better, that you look at Victor Wooten or Richard Bona, what those guys are doing. And I think certainly the younger crowd, they're looking at the musicians of their generation and seeing that. So, I think he kind of got lost in the mix there for a while, but with, social media and YouTube and like I said, the documentary now, I think people really appreciate more what he did.
Yeah. And that documentary is fantastic. And that just came out recently, right?
Yeah. It was November last year.
Yeah.
Thanksgiving weekend. Yeah.
Which is remarkable. So where did life take you after high school?
So I went to college and, I decided to major in music. I didn't really kind of pick a specific major. I just decided just to go. And at some point I picked composition. And, of course, the safe thing at that point was education. But I knew that wasn't for me. I knew a lot of my friends were, and they seemed well equipped for that kind of life and would be good at it. And for me, it just didn't resonate as a skill that I would have. And so I ended up deciding on composition. And what I figured was, well, shoot, if I'm going to major in composition, why bother with the degree? So I opted just to take music classes and not really any of the math, English, sciences, or anything like that. And so I lived in Texas at the time. And of course, being in Texas, the school to go to was North Texas. And so I transferred there my second year. And, it turned out to be a pretty colossal mistake for me. What I soon realized being at North Texas was that if you're a really talented musician and got in one of the lab bands, worked your way up, it was a place to go to be found, more than, I don't think their composition department was their strength. I mean, I can't say for certain one way or the other, but, it seemed to me like, the school was about performance, and certainly they had 9 lab bands. And if you're in the 1 o'clock, you were the stuff, that was major. A lot of recruiting happened out of there. And so I didn't really fit in that well. They had an attendance policy that the first university I went to did not have. And I was not a good, I wasn't good at attendance.
Right.
I had a 4.0, but they decided to kick me out for academic suspension for a year after my first year. And so at that point, I guess I was about 20 or so, 21 years old, and a lot of soul searching. And I was like, I don't want to go back there. And I started looking around at a lot of my friends and watching the lifestyle of the musician and how many lessons they had to give a week and gigs. And a lot of them were doing landscaping and all this sort of thing. And for me, it was a period of like real soul searching. Again, I didn't want to teach. I didn't think that was my strength. And I knew gigging wasn't going to be, really any kind of solid bet. And, the music industry was completely different at that point in time. This was the late 80s, and the dream was get a record contract, which was, I mean, today with YouTube and Bandcamp and, all these things, it's not that it's easy, but it's different. You can build an audience that, the labels aren't in control like they were back then. So for me, it was like a period of real soul searching. And I decided that I should probably think about a career and at least attempt something of a career. And for me, that meant doing something creative. And I have this like crazy family history in terms of, both my parents were artists. They met at the Corcoran Art School in DC. I have aunts who are in the art business. My father, my grandfather were in the art business, graphic design. And so, I decided to pursue that, to try that out. And so in 1990, I got an entry-level job as a graphic designer. And I remember, back then it was pretty overwhelming trying to learn everything. But I had my father and my grandfather, and I would sit them down on the couch every Saturday and drink beers with them and just pepper them with questions about everything related to graphic design and printing. And, these two were, masters, both had spent their entire career in that field. And so I learned a lot in a very short time and kind of parlayed that into a career that I really enjoyed. It was creative. It wasn't your normal desk job, kind of middle management kind of thing. It was long hours, but there's a lot of creativity to it. And so I kind of settled in that way. And, when I look back, I think, man, what a weird path it was. But, it all kind of makes sense now because in 95, I was an art director for a catalog company. And, at that time, the web was just coming on. And usually when, somebody wanted a website at the company, they went to one of two places. They either went to the IT department or they went to the graphic design department. And the company I was at didn't have an IT department. So the CEO came to me and said, I want a website. And this was, I think, April of 1995. Amazon had launched. I mean, it was like Yahoo was actually a directory, a list of sites that the two guys that founded Yahoo thought were cool. It wasn't a search engine. So there were no books on how to learn how to make a website. There was no market for it. And I remember, I learned enough to release the first site and start getting hate mail from people that said corporations don't belong on the web. I mean, this is like, to think about it now, it's just crazy, but that's how it was. But I tell you that at that point in time, I was really burned out with the graphic design business. And I thought immediately, this is the future. this is what I want to do. And I put everything into, the web at that point. So that was a little over 21 years ago. And so I've been doing that ever since. And definitely my passion in terms of work. Yeah.
Oh man, so many questions. It's such an interesting I mean, I was talking to somebody recently, a composer, who was saying how similar composition and programming are in a lot of ways, just in terms of like logic, but creativity, but do you see any I mean, I'm sure you never could have predicted, being a composition major, that you'd end up doing that. There was no web, a few years later.
Right.
But looking back, do you find some parallels between composition and programming?
Absolutely. It's really interesting because in the 90s, when the .com boom was happening, they couldn't find programmers. There was such a shortage because it was so new. And I remember reading about this study where they said that musicians were more apt to be good programmers than almost anybody else that were non-programmers. And if I remember the article correctly, what they were basically saying was that as musicians, at least the ones that know how to read notation, it uses the same part of the brain. When you code, you use the same part of the brain you would to read notation, because reading music it's not English. It's not a spoken language, but you're translating that into something. And so it was very much akin to programming. And so that, I didn't know that until years later, but I tell you, most web shops that I've been involved in, there's musicians all over the place, people that have a guitar at their desk or, whatever. And it's very common. It's very common to see. And my brother, he's a bass trombonist. He actually made the 1 o'clock working on his master's in North Texas. He works with me. He's worked with me for a decade now. He's like this master coder. That's just another example of, somebody who translated it very easily from one to the other. Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, because it's like a combination of logic but creativity that you need to like it. I'm just thinking on the music side of things, and that's very cool. Man, I'd love to know, like, what was it now, having been in the business, for the last couple decades, looking back on like that 1995 website and like what a person could do. What was that experience like in hindsight, like putting together this early website?
I mean, it would be hard for me to look at what we created back then, just because, by any standard today, it would be atrocious. But I think that, certainly the web has changed dramatically, especially when the social web came on. First search became really important. So Google, was it for many years, and obviously still a big part of it. But, the social stuff really transformed it. But before that, we didn't talk about SEO and search, and we didn't talk, obviously there was no social anything. And so, it was very limited. I think at the same time, getting the early start, we didn't have a lot of competition, that there weren't a lot of sites out there. And so, I think that the thread that's always been interesting to me is the psychology, the human behavior and what makes it tick. And so it's always centered around content for me, and having content be the draw to the site, and then, figuring out what to do with that traffic once it gets there. But yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing how fast things have gone, and how radical, to think about like just Google from 2000 on, the only dominant player out there. And then all of a sudden Facebook comes on majorly strong. And, so you have these two things now that, where you used to just have one, and before you really didn't have anything. There was Yahoo for sure. And that was a big deal. If you could get featured on Yahoo, that was a huge deal, but not quite the same as what evolved.
Oh man. Well, I even thinking about Facebook, like I remember when they first turned on the news feed, and people were like up in arms, like, what is this feature? And that's just like the social experience that everybody has now. Talk about forward thinking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. Do you ever internet wayback machine any of your old projects? Just Yeah,
I have. I said it's painful, but then I try to remind myself that we tried to push the envelope as much as we could with what, but there was dial-up modems. The video was out of the question. Podcasts were out of the question. All this stuff, it would have taken forever just to play your podcast, for example, you would have had to download it for a couple hours probably just to listen to it. So, it was like very limited, very crude. It was all a building block, it's like anything else. It's like, learning your scales and then improvising later, so I think, it very similar in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. When did now you built the official Jaco website, right? But
yes.
Was it mid 2000s that you were working on that?
I launched the first version at 2002, I believe, and ran that to about 2007. And then I started up again. I think it was 2014. So the current version that's up now in the Facebook page in the store, I'm involved in all of that.
What inspired the page back in 2002? What was the impetus behind that?
Well, it's the official site, so it's run by his family. And I think it was around 98. I was such a huge Jaco fan, and there was not much of a website up and running at that time. And I think it was maybe a coming soon page, in fact. And so I went on the domain records to find, there's a P.O. box, and I used to mail them letters. And as it turns out, lots of people were mailing them the letters, and they were working on their own stuff, and they were like kind of dismissing, this outside stuff. They didn't know anybody, obviously, we're sending them letters, but, I kept at it, and then, no response. And then around 2000, I got a copy of Bass Player magazine in my mailbox. I think it was January 2000. And Jaco was on the cover, and it was talking about Bob Bobbing's Portrait of Jaco, the Early Years project. And in that article, there was a web address. And I went there and it said coming soon. So I reached out to Bob Bobbing, the producer of the Early Years box set, and said, hey, I could help you with this web stuff, and ended up flying down to Fort Lauderdale, meeting with him. At that point in time, I've discovered that he didn't have any of the packaging put together yet. And so being a print guy as well as a web guy, I told him, well, I could do that too. And so I think had it been at least 2 years that we worked on that thing. It was an 80-page booklet, a slipcase, 8-panel digipack. I mean, even the CDs had art on them, it was a major undertaking, but he and I created that whole box set, the packaging for it. And that's how I got introduced to Jaco's family through Bob. And so it was 2002 when we launched the first official website, and I got really busy with Squidoo in 2005. And by 2007, I think that's when I stopped working on the site. And then like I said, I took it over in 2014 again.
So you got involved with Squidoo 2005, you said?
Yeah.
What, maybe talk listeners through that, like how that happened, what Squidoo was, and selling. Yeah.
Yeah. So most people, I think, are familiar with who Seth Godin is. He's a best-selling author. I think 17 or 18 New York Times best-selling books in the areas of business and marketing. And Seth's first book, Permission Marketing, came out in 99. I read it and I was floored, and I was an instant Seth Godin fan. Just, like before Amazon, I was parking in the bookstore parking lot the day his book came out to get it and would read it that day. So, Seth had a blog. He blogged every day. And so that was part of my daily reading habit, just reading his posts. And it was early 2005 where he said he had a summer project. He was looking for people to help. And if you know any of these skills, email me. So I emailed him, and, it was all like top secret. He wasn't divulging what the project was, until we got up there. And it was Father's Day 2005 that I flew up to New York and met him. And he outlined his idea for Squidoo. And so the intent was that me and the 3 other guys he selected, and as well as him, would work over the summer to prototype what Squidoo was going to be. And that really didn't happen because there was a lot of other preliminary work that had to be done. And basically the site needed to be architected. So I worked like the equivalent of a second full-time job all summer.
Oh man.
Architecting Squidoo, writing 100-page spec on it, and, prototyping stuff. And at the end of that summer, Seth said, okay, we're going to do this, and I want you to be the COO of this company and run it. And so I jumped at that. To me, it was like a really exciting concept. And I, again, kind of like in the way, for younger people, how Jaco may not be like what he was to me. If you think back to 2005, Google was it, and there was no social web, none. And so user generated content, social web, Squidoo was one of the first platforms in that space. There was no Tumblr, there was no Instagram, Facebook didn't even own Facebook.com in 2005. It was thefacebook.com. And I think they had 1 million members, and it was all, if you remember, you had to have an .edu email address.
I remember that.
You could only get in if you're a college student. No Twitter, no YouTube. I think Flickr was one of the only other sites out there for user generated content. So we were definitely one of the first. And man, that project really worked. At our peak, by 2012, we were ranked 35th on the web for traffic, which was about 82 million visits a month, and just much bigger than anything I'd done to date. And I'm sure much bigger than anything I'll do ever again, partially by choice, because, I loved it. I loved it. We did it 9 years, before it was acquired, but, it was 9 years of 7 day a week. Get woke up in the middle of the night if the servers went down, that kind of thing, kind of life. So, I wouldn't trade it for the world, but, I like working fewer hours now.
Yeah.
No treble is a handful enough.
Man, I mean, like that level of intensity just might be bonkers. I mean, I think about that a lot now, having moved out here to the Bay Area, where that's like the stereotypical, that's what everybody is trying to do, and like 7 days a week and those. How did you avoid burnout? I mean, even if you're doing something that you love so much, it's like such a cool project, how did you keep from going crazy during that time?
I think that, working with Seth was without a doubt one of the thrills of my career, by a long shot. And, we were a company that was always tweaking, always inventing. And, that's my favorite thing. Let's try new things. Let's see what works, what doesn't. And we had a real culture of that. We had a really solid team of people that embrace that culture and work fast. And so, it was always kind of a lab for us to play with. And, with that level of traffic, you could post something in the afternoon and collect enough data by the evening to decide if it was a good idea or not.
Yeah, right.
And so, it was fun. And, Seth is so inspirational. And, I want to say also that a big part of the culture he wanted, and he made sure was part of the company, was a work-life balance. And so it wasn't that he made me or wanted me or expected me to work as much as I did. It was just, that's what I did. But when I needed time off, when I had kids, young kids at the time, and, there was always no question, anytime I wanted to spend time with the kids, or, something was going on, and then I had I was famous for my 1 week at the beach vacation where I shut down everything, all devices, and just floated in the Atlantic for 7 days and read books and cleared my head. And it was great because I never had a pushy boss who expected me to do something or be available on vacation or whatever. So there was a nice balance there when I needed it.
Well, I think that's something it's great to hear about, that week-long floating in the Atlantic, deviceless. Mm-hmm. I think that's something everybody struggles with. Like, I know I struggle with that like always connected world we live in now. And I mean, in a way, it's awesome. Like I can record a podcast, like walking down the street, and upload it if I wanted to do that,
Right.
But like the dark side, of course, is like that always on, works. What have you done the last few years just to kind of maintain balance? Do you have any strategies or?
It's definitely hard. I mean, when you put yourself out there like you have with this podcast or like No Treble, there are so many ways for people to engage you, and everybody chooses every avenue. So there's Facebook messages, both personally and through the page. And then there's, email, and there's texting and phone calls, and, just, you name it. So, we get pinged pretty hard. I think that, what I've learned over the years is you have to kind of dedicate a certain block of time to that stuff, and you'll never get through your email. You'll never get through all these messages, but we get through everything eventually. But, I think that there are times a day where I completely turn email off and all notifications and just say, I'm going to focus on this, and then I'll get to it when it's there, because it's always there. And, I think if we allow the interruptions all day, it's 6, 7 o'clock at night, and we're like, oh, I haven't touched my to-do list yet. And so I think that's a lesson I learned a long time ago. Shut off this stuff and tell people, if there's an emergency, call me, because that'll come through. But other than that, I'm ignoring all the other notifications and pings. The phone just dings all day long.
Yeah. Well, I think I never realized just how distracting that was until a few months ago. And I would just be typing or working on something, and I'd see my phone buzz, and I'd kind of look and go back. But man, that just kicks you out of that creative groove. If you're trying to do anything substantial, whether it's writing or recording or whatever.
Yeah, it's, and I think so much of it is kind of unnecessary. I mean, with No Treble, it is necessary because we want to be approachable. That's one of the things we take pride in. We do make it a point to reply to all the Facebook messages that come through our page and that sort of thing. But there's only so many cat memes and whatever that, a person can handle before they're like, I'm going to get back to some important work here.
Well, I always think about that quadrant diagram. That's the 7 habits of highly effective people. And there's the urgent and important. And so much of that falls into the urgent but not important, I think, is the quadrant.
Exactly. Exactly.
And, yeah. Okay. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, maybe I'd love to hear. So you worked on the Jacos site, and the Squidoo came along, and maybe just tell folks about when you conceived of No Treble and just how that all developed.
Yeah, I think that I thought of No Treble and wanted to do it with a different name 10 years before I actually did it. I really wanted to kind of merge my two passions in life, which were web and bass. And I mean, it was pretty funny how, it was a very different time when I thought of the idea, and we didn't have the kind of technologies that we have today that made it easier to build and maintain. And that was part of it. It would have been extremely expensive in 2000 to build what we ultimately built. We launched in May of 2009. But what was funny about it was I had a lot of people in my network trying to talk me out of building it. And the reason they were trying to talk me out of building it was they said it's too small. And I didn't care about that. I never did create it to make money. I never created it to be big. I wanted it to be successful. I was a longtime reader of Bass Player magazine. And before that, before Bass Player existed, when I was a kid, all of us bass players subscribed to Guitar Player magazine and flipped to the back of the magazine for the 2 or 3 pages they dedicated to bass. And I loved it. But, the print industry has gone through some real hardship, and that's, in some cases still a very viable model, but it's changed, and the web is really hurt, that industry. And when I looked around, even when I decided I'm going to do this, it was late 2008 when I decided to do it. I looked around and I didn't see an online magazine that, I wanted to create. What I learned a long time ago was if you're going to do something on the web or anywhere, if you have the chance to be number one, and there's no guarantee, but if you have the chance to be number one, that's an opportunity. And so, I wouldn't try to create a search engine or a social network today. Right. The chances of being number one are slim to none. And certainly in 2008, I wouldn't have wanted to create a bass forum, because Talk Bass is it. And so not that I wanted to do a forum, but that's an example of something that would have been foolish to even attempt, with the longevity and the notoriety of Talk Bass. But in terms of online magazines, I didn't see anything that was like what I wanted to create. And so I thought, well, you can give it a shot. It doesn't cost a lot of money to do something like this. And so we started out, and it was interesting because connecting it to the social web and the way we did it, and we built some tools that made that happen that are commonplace today, but weren't then. It really worked. And, I was never a Facebook fan. I was always a Twitter guy, and I tried to make the Twitter No Treble thing pretty big. we had a Facebook page and it was on autopilot. I literally never did anything with it. And I looked over and I'd worked really hard on Twitter and we got like 400 followers. And I looked over at Facebook on autopilot, had 2,500 fans. And I thought, okay, I better go look at Facebook some more. So I started investing a lot more time over there, and it grew and grew and grew. And I was pretty surprised by the growth. And I still don't know how many bass players there are in the world, but the numbers keep going up. And I think that, it's definitely been a successful project. But more importantly than that, connections I've made, the contributors that we have, they're like family to me. The feedback we get from readers, is so gratifying, and that's what keeps me going. It's not a moneymaker, and maybe it will be one day, but like I said, it's never been, how can I get rich off of this thing? It was much more about just kind of merging my passions together and building something that, hopefully other people resonated with. And so that's been the case. And I think that for me, the kind of magazine that I wanted to build was one that certainly covered the major guys. If Victor Wooten has news, Stanley Clarke, Marcus Miller, if there's anything about Jaco, of course we're going to cover that. And I love those guys, and I love, seeing what they're doing. But because the web has leveled the playing field that allowed No Treble to be what it is, it's the same thing for bass players out there who are embracing YouTube and embracing social media and getting their art out there to the world. We love discovering great talent all over the place. So we feature a daily video. We do a reader spotlight every week, and we do other things that give our readers the opportunity to get coverage alongside Victor Wooten, alongside these other guys. And to see like a video that might have 100 views and then we post it and then it has 10,100 views the next day, it's such a win-win-win, right? Because to me, it's like this great content, and I didn't have to come up with that music every single day. They get, all these eyeballs on them, and the readers dig it. And I'm thinking, this is a thing of beauty, right? This is really fantastic all the way around. And so then I've had a lot of people come to me and say, you really put my music on the map. I've sold a bunch of albums as a result and got all these subscribers now. And, I just love that aspect of it. I just love it because there's a lot of talent out there that people didn't know about historically because, the labels were in charge. And so, you look at Xander Zahn, you look at Aaron Gibson, you look at Steve Lawson. Steve was already doing amazing things. I mean, all those guys did amazing things in terms of putting their stuff out there and building an audience. And I think we helped in some way. Wolfpack, those guys, told us that we really helped them at the beginning sell a lot of their album. And I don't want to overstate anything here. Like, these guys, they're doing what you're supposed to do, which is putting art out there to the world, working hard to get exposure and build an audience. But when we can play a role in that, that's the most exciting thing to me. My favorite thing every week is the reader spotlight, just because that's what we're about.
Yeah.
So
that's so cool that you do that reader spotlight. And I mean, man, that's like that. Talk about a win-win. That's really what it is. Because the beauty of this open playing field is that we can get our message out there and we can put our art out there. But the big challenge is discoverability, right? And it just makes me so sad sometimes when I see like just the most amazing performance. The guy that I was interviewing for the podcast, I went on this video and it's this amazing Daft Punk arrangement that he'd done. It sounds like it's like using a looping pedal, but it's not. It's just upright bass doing this. And it had like 280 views. I'm thinking like, man, 280 views. This thing should have.
Yeah, I know. I know. Well, it happens on No Treble sometimes too, where we'll put a video out and I'm thinking this is just killer. And for whatever reason, maybe because the bass player is not recognizable in the photo or whatever, and it just doesn't get the love. And I'm like, like if you just watch this, you'd become an instant fan. But yeah, I mean, it's great. It still stuns me, like that example, 200 views on something that terrific, but hopefully we'll find it, feature it, and hopefully it'll do something.
Yeah.
So yeah.
You mentioned this earlier, and this is something I've wondered about a lot. It's like, how many bassists are there out there really? And I know that like who knows, but man, do you have any? Can you even get it like in a range? Do you think are there 100,000? There got to be at least 100,000.
Yeah, at least that. I mean, we get about 280,000 visits a month on the treble, and it's definitely over 100,000 people visiting unique a month.
Okay.
So, I mean, are they all bass players? Probably not, because somebody shares a video and, their non-bass playing friends might come watch it. But I gauge things more on our how-tos and the traffic on those, where like bass lessons and things like that, which no non-bass player would probably want to click on.
Probably not.
But, we've had months where we've hit 250,000 visits a month. And again, are they all bass players? Who knows? But I have no idea. I really don't. I remember when I did some research before I started No Treble, and this was back when I originally thought of the idea back in 99, 2000, I did some research and I think it was something about the census. For whatever reason, they knew how many guitar players there were in the country. And somebody estimated that for every 10 guitar players, there's one bass player. And, it seemed kind of high to me, but they said there was 14 million amateur guitar players in America. So that means if that math is true, there was 1.4 million amateur bass players in America. I don't buy it, but
right.
Really, I don't know. If there's 1.4, man, we got a lot of work to do.
We got right. Well, yeah, that's just America, right? I mean, like, and even if that number's high, you got, and another thing you mentioned that I've thought a lot about, it's interesting that you brought it up, is like that Twitter, Facebook, because I love Twitter too. I find Twitter super useful, but it's interesting that you've had the experience that like you really get the traction on Facebook, or you have. Do you have any speculation why that is, or why that?
I don't know what Twitter's numbers are now in terms of daily active users, but my guess is that Facebook is way above that. But, I think that if you look at like the tech world, I read a lot of tech blogs, I read a lot of, technology stuff on the web. And when you look at, I pay attention to the counts on the share buttons.
Sure.
And in the tech world, Twitter dominates and Facebook is quite secondary. But for whatever reason, we've always been the opposite of that. Facebook dominant, Twitter, a distant second. And so, I don't really know. I mean, I know there's plenty of bass players on Twitter. I don't think that when you think about, like, if you're a bass player and if you're part of your social activities is marketing, I just think that Facebook probably offers better stuff. You see, like, I'm amazed. We embed a video on our Facebook page, or, a lot of like guys out there that do that. The counts are just staggering, on Facebook. And I think on Twitter, it just doesn't have that same kind of mechanism or viral loop, I think that Facebook has. I mean, I don't know about you, but I get stuck in that vortex sometimes every night of swiping through Facebook, and you watch one video and there's 5 related videos. And
yes, yeah, me too. I have to try to put. I've been starting to put my phone by the door when I walk in sometimes at night,
right?
Just but yeah, I've spent many an hour doing just that.
Yeah, and I don't feel like the same kind of activities happening on Twitter. When I'm scrolling through Twitter, I'm just scrolling, and you hit the heart. If any tweet you like, and you just kind of keep going, and it's not quite the same.
Well, I was also wondering about the contributors that you've assembled for No Treble. Like, how is that all structured? Did they come on kind of organically over time? And do people publish? Do you have is it just kind of people publish when they got something to put out, or how do you organize all of that?
Well, the growth of the contributor team has definitely been very organic. A lot of our contributors have come. They were readers that we connected with on a deeper level, or met at NAMM or whatever. We definitely have a very set editorial calendar. So like Ask Damien Erskine's every week, every Wednesday at 3:30 Eastern. Ariana Cap's Talking Technique is every other Monday. We have Ted Bliss Gould now. He's doing Talking Style. He's been once a month. Looks like he's going twice a month. And then Ryan Medora. She does 2 different columns for us every other Friday. And so, you get the picture. It's very structured in terms of, we have these anchor points, which are our columnists and lessons. And Rufus Philpott just debuted his first thing. So, we have slots that are dedicated to those people, and it's at a regular, Donovan Stokes. I don't want to miss anybody. there's a lot. So each contributor has their slot and their cadence. And so, and then, we have the daily video, and then we cover new albums, we cover new gear, we cover news stories and things of that nature. And then we have things like the Reader Spotlight, which is every Tuesday. All the slots are pretty much filled in terms of what that is, what time of the day and what day of the week. So we have a very regular schedule in that. And so the contributors, all work towards that schedule. The thing that I wanted to do, and I think the thing that is probably what makes most people the happiest, is that I didn't want to limit No Treble and say, okay, Damien, write about this, Ryan, write about that. These are bass players. These are talented bass players. They're knowledgeable. They have their own opinions and insights and everything else. And so I say, write about what you want to write about. And it's great because I think it brings great diversity. Like I always joke with Kevin, I'm not a metal guy. Kevin Johnson is definitely my go-to guy, the managing editor. He's been with me almost since the beginning, and there's no way I could have done it without him or really anybody else I mentioned. But he's a linchpin, and Kevin's this metal guy. And I always joke with him saying, I can't tell the good metal from the bad metal. So, like in the early days of No Treble, there was a lot of jazz videos and stuff, and we were attracting a lot of jazz fans, and people started saying, well, what's with all the jazz all the time? It's like, well, I'm the only guy picking.
Right.
So now we're getting, we've gotten a lot of diversity with that, which is great. Like I don't want to limit anything. There's a lot of diversity out there, and I want us to represent that. So, with all these contributors, the diversity is definitely, I think, there.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. No, that's great. And what a lineup. And Donovan's a friend of mine, and he's an interesting guy. He's kind of like a heavy metal guy, but for the upright bass in a way, like really wild.
Yeah. When I first met him, I was stunned at what he was doing with a double bass. I was like, man, this guy's pioneering some stuff. Has been doing it for a long time. He's a beast. And I was very lucky. He actually, that relationship is how I found Kevin, because I live very close to, or I did at the time, live very close to Shenandoah University, where Donovan teaches. And I had reached out to him to see if he wanted to contribute. And he did. And then I said to him, like, man, I need help. Do you have any double bass students who are like super reliable and I could talk to? And he introduced me to Kevin, and that's how the Kevin relationship started. So Kevin was still studying when he started with No Treble, and since graduated. So, man,
I don't usually have any set questions for any of these. I just sort of talk, but like I sort of started asking people, and it's one you hear in a lot of podcasts, but I love it. It's a great, and you might have a good answer, but like if you could go back to your, let's say, 20-year-old self, and having done all the things you've done and the career trajectories that you've taken, got any advice for that 20-year-old Corey?
Oh man. Well, the 20-year-old Corey got thrown out of college. It's tough because I think that the way my career went, I was always going to get thrown out of college because I never fit in with the lines and the, whatever. I think that I would call myself like a meat and potatoes bass player. Uh-huh. And I think that if I had to go back, knowing what I know now, and certainly what I've learned from other people and our contributors and everything else, I think I would have probably spent more time broadening my horizons on the bass. The career really took over, and there was a long period of time where I didn't touch a bass, and I got back into it. And I think that would be it, because the harder I work, if I pick up a bass at the end of the day, I just naturally feel better.
Yeah.
And I kind of lost that for many years while I was trying to build my career and trying to pay the bills. But in terms of the way my career went and panned out, it was hard. I don't have any regrets. I'm glad the way it turned out. I guess most people would say, try to talk this kid into going to class and making the attendance portion of the grade. But, I I don't know how that would have benefited me one way or the other.
Right.
You know, I'd have a composition partial degree.
Right, right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and doing something like No Trouble, I mean, man, talk about a great way to broaden your horizons. You know, like, I mean, that's the thing that's so amazing about this social media, whatever you want to call it right now, with YouTube and that's what I find, like, doing this podcast myself, like it sort of, I'm discovering all these new projects and new styles and I think it's totally broadened my horizons. I think I was like a real meat and potatoes bass player, like from the orchestral side, but very much like I'm so much more kind of curious these days after that.
Oh yeah. I tell you, my music collection has grown more thanks to No Trouble than probably any period before that. Yeah. And my, you know, downloading these transcriptions and stuff and just trying to work through them. And this stuff, the way the bass has gone, man. Stuart Clayton does a lot of our transcriptions and he picks like ones that I'm like, man, it's going to take me a year if I can even get it. But, yeah, so, but it's fun and I'm always up for a challenge, you know, but yeah, you know, what you're talking about is dead on. Just the discovery part of it is extraordinary.
Well, thanks again, Corey, for being on the podcast. So much fun to hang out with you online here. And folks, check him out online at notreble.com or corybrown.me. And again, thank you so much for listening. I am so thrilled to have you here. I really do appreciate you listening to these episodes. And you could be doing a lot of things with your time. And I'm honored that you're taking the time to listen to these. And I know it's time well spent. And I appreciate it. And Corey appreciates it. And it's just exciting times we're living in. And I have so much fun talking about these kind of things, geeking out on bass, geeking out on life, practicing, what's going on in the world. It's just such a thrill for me to do this. And thanks again for checking it out. And be sure to check out our website for more information about the mission of this podcast. It's contrabassconversations.com. And we'll see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.